So hello and welcome to this NPTEL course entitled Feminist Writings, where we'll begin with a new text today. And the new text that we'll start with today is a poem by Sylvia Plath called Tulips. It's a very complex poem, and the reason why we have chosen this for the purpose of this course is that how it looks at the human body, the human self, the human agency, from a feminist perspective, of course, especially when it is situated in a very heavily commodified space, a very heavily reified space, a very heavily dehumanized space. And the space in question over here in this poem is a medical space, the medical space of the hospital. And the whole experience of being subjected to the medical gaze, the whole experience of being dissected by the medical gaze, of being looked at by the medical gaze, of being examined and judged by the medical gaze is very vividly described over here. Now, like all good poems in this genre, this type of setting, what Plath does in this particular work, very interestingly, I think, is there is a degree of defamiliarization that is at play over here. Now, what do I mean by defamiliarization? So the familiar parameters, the familiar metaphors, the familiar understanding of objects and their semantic significance is dramatically defamiliarized in this poem. Let's take the example of tulips for the matter. I mean, the very title of the poem, Tulips. So tulips are flowers, and the flower metaphor in this poem works in a very different way. So normally flowers metaphorically suggest tranquility, reconciliation, peace, love, romance, etc. But over here, flowers become signifiers of separation, signifiers of alienation, signifiers of violence, and lastly, and most complexly, signifiers of consumption. And the whole idea of being consumed by the gaze, the whole idea of being consumed by your experience becomes interesting in this poem. And among the many things which this poem does, it also talks about, very dramatically, the sense of the loss of ownership on yourself, the loss of ownership on your body as a cognitive mechanism, your body as a cognitive self, your body as an extended embodiment. So there are two kinds of embodiment in question over here, and both are interrupted. One kind of embodiment is the embedded embodiment, what is inside your body as a neural mechanism, the way you think, the way you behave, the way your body functions. The other form of embodiment is extended embodiment. How do you navigate with the world around you, around yourself, with the objects around you, the people around you, the language around you, the apparatus around you, the discursive apparatus around you? That's extended embodiment. And obviously, for a normal, functional, healthy embodiment to take place, the extended and the embedded embodiments must be in sync with each other. So I'm just drawing a little bit on embodiment studies, but hopefully that's interesting and useful for the purpose of this particular poem. Now, what this poem does is that it talks about how both orders of embodiment are interrupted in different degrees, especially and not least the idea of extended embodiment, the way she navigates the world outside, the way the speaker in the poem is situated in a medical space, is almost immersed in a medical space, where she begins to lose the sense of ownership on her body, the sense of ownership over her motor body, cognitive body, etc. So the proto-self, the motor self, the cognitive self, the existential self, so all these different kinds of selves are at work over here, and they are becoming increasingly out of sync with each other because of this medical experience, because of the entire idea of experientiality at play. Now, a little bit of the biographical background of this poem is interesting and perhaps helpful for us to understand and be aware of. So Plath wrote this poem on the aftermath of a very tragic miscarriage that she had. So, I mean, she was pregnant with a child, and then obviously the miscarriage happened very tragically, and the trauma of the miscarriage is very much there in this poem as some kind of a spectral presence. And there is this presence of a dead child, a dead being, an unborn being, which is there very palpably in this particular poem in a very tragic, spectral way. So with this background in mind, with this theory in mind, let's sort of dive into the poem and see what it does in terms of the craft, in terms of the language, in terms of the narrative discourse that it offers us. So this is Tulips by Sylvia Plath. The tulips are too excitable. It is winter here. Look how white everything is, how quiet, how snowed in. I'm learning peacefulness, lying by myself quietly as the light lies on these white walls, this bed, these hands. I am nobody. I have nothing to do with explosions. I have given my name and my day clothes up to the nurses, and my history to the anesthetist, and my body to surgeons. So if you look at the opening stanza, we have the speaker describing the passivity, describing the powerlessness as it gradually unfolds. The very first line, the tulips are too excitable. They are excitable, they are vibrant, but then not in a very positive sense. Excitable means they are sort of tending towards exploding, tending towards perhaps a sense of destruction, perhaps a sense of violence. It is winter here. Winter, obviously, in a normal Western metaphorical understanding, is a season of decline, a season of death, a season of non-abundance, a season of infertility. And that idea of infertility, that idea of deadness, the idea of decadence is very much there, especially if you have the biographical background in mind, the presence of this miscarriage, the trauma of the miscarriage, the experience of the miscarriage, and the dead child, which is very much there in the poem. And there is a sepulchral quality to the whiteness which follows, a coffin-like quality. Look how white everything is, how quiet, how snowed in. So the whole idea of this snowed-in landscape becomes a very sepulchral landscape, a very sepulchral setting, and that becomes a metaphor, a signifier of deadness as it proceeds, as it dramatizes in the poem. And the third line is interesting. I'm learning peacefulness. So the whole idea of having to learn peacefulness is interesting over here. There is a degree of discomfort about this peacefulness, perhaps. There is a degree of anxiety and violence about this peacefulness. And then we have, I am nobody, I have nothing to do with explosions. I have given my name and my day clothes up to the nurses, and my history to the anesthetist, and my body to surgeons. So everything is taken away by other people. My name is taken away to the nurses, by the nurses. I've given away my name, I've given away my day clothes. I've slipped into this medical uniform, this patient uniform, as it were. My history, the medical history, my biographical history, all my history has been given to the anesthetist. And of course, the whole idea of the anesthetist is important. It becomes a signifier, a metaphor for numbness. So I've given away my history to numbness, as it were, the embodiment of numbness, which is the anesthetist over here, and my body to the surgeon. So my body, so the entire idea of ownership is at stake over here. Your ownership on your body, your ownership on your senses, your ownership on your cognitive control, all that is surrendered to the external environment around you, to the people around you, etc. And that act of surrendering your ownership on your body, that act of surrendering your ownership on yourself and your senses becomes a very important experience of liquidation, as it were, the idea of the emptied out self, or the emptying out self, this gradual decline of the self which is at work over here. So my body is taken over by the surgeons. And now the next stanza, they have propped my head between the pillow and the sheet cuff, like an eye between two white lids that will not shut. Stupid pupil, it has to take everything in. The nurses pass and pass, they are no trouble. They pass away, gulls pass inland in their white caps, doing things with their hands, one just the same as another. So it is impossible to tell how many there are. So what we have over here is a description of the medical space, and look at the, what's interesting about the description is what appears to the patient is a degree of bureaucratization of the medical space. It's a very bureaucratized space. Everything comes and goes in a very routine order, in a very mechanical order, and there's a degree of dehumanization at work over here as well. The nurses don't appear to be humans. The nurses appear to be machines coming and going, perhaps punching in and punching out at different times, doing their duties, etc. So there is no economy of empathy which is established over here between the patient and the nurses, between the medical machinery and the patient immersed in the machineries. And the medical machinery is precisely a machine. It's a massive medical machine which is completely dehumanized, and there is no empathetic connect with the patient, and even the patient is reified into an object of study, in an object of correction, as it were. And in a very interesting sense, one might push this back into the very interesting study between state control and medical control, how the body of the citizen, the body of the subject becomes, it comes to be owned by the state, it comes to be owned by the medical machinery of the state, which is often in collusion with the state machinery, which needs to correct a sick person, which needs to correct an interrupted person, right? And this idea of correction becomes interesting because it's very closely connected to coercion. right? So the sick person, the interrupted person needs to be coerced back into the healthy being, and needs to be corrected back into this healthy being. And that, of course, that machinery is more often than not very, very masculinist in quality, very patriarchal in quality. So the whole idea of the whole location of the female body inside this patriarchal massive machinery of medicine becomes a very symbolic and structural image which needs to be unpacked, particularly in the context of the broader context of this course, feminist writings. So what Plath seems to say over here is she has a sense of liquidation. She suffers a sense of an experience of liquidation as a female patient in this massive machinery which is cutting her in with its medical gaze, with its reified gaze, and with this, the nurses coming and going on different intervals without really making any human intervention. And we're very clearly told that it is impossible to tell how many nurses there are because they look just the same as everyone else. Each person looks the same as everyone else, so they're cut from the same cloth. They're wearing uniforms, presumably, and the whole idea of wearing uniform is designed to establish a sense of uniformity across the medical space, right? And that uniformity often undercuts any possibility of human intervention, any possibility of human empathy at work. Now, what has been said over here is they have propped my head between the pillow and the sheet cuff. And again, look at the very metonymic quality of description at play over here. The head is described separately, the hands are described separately. These hands at the beginning, the very opening stanza, we had this idea of these hands, and now you have this head, and now you have pupils, like an eye between two white lids that will not shut. So images of an eye which is not shutting. And the eye not shutting becomes almost a mechanical operation. It's not really the human, organic quality of seeing something. It's the inorganic, almost machinic way of staring at something. So the difference between looking and seeing, the difference between listening and hearing becomes important, because listening and seeing, these have human qualities, these have a degree of human association about them. They entail human reception, they entail human impression, they entail human perception or human interpretation to a certain extent. Whereas if we talk about seeing, or we talk about we talk about looking, and if we talk about hearing, they have an inorganic quality about them. It's almost like something is being heard without being listened to, something is being looked at without being seen, and that has a superficial, machinic, inorganic quality about it. And now, what is interesting is this idea of the pupil, the eye, which takes everything in. So there is no agency to stop, there is no agency to intervene over here. So everything has to be taken in, whether you want it or not. And that whole idea of having an eye which will not shut, the whole idea of having this organ which is beyond your cognitive control, it gives you, it sort of underlines and underscores the loss of agency at work over here, the sense of agency-lessness at play. And of course, then we're told the nurses pass and pass, they are no trouble, they pass away, gulls pass inland in the white caps. So the whole idea of the whole panoramic image of gulls passing and flying past inland across seas become important, because what's interesting about the image is the temporality and the periodic quality of that passing. The gulls come and pass the inland and pass away. They come and go away. There is no settlement, there is no intervention, there is no human connect, there is no sense of kinship at play away. The gulls come and pass away. They fly away across the inland without really settling in, without establishing any kind of kinship, organic or otherwise, with the land they pass across. And a similar way, the nurses come and pass her. They perhaps do the duties, they perhaps fix her up in different degrees, they perhaps set up the machinery around her at a micro as well as a macro level. However, there is no description of any human conversation, there's no description of any human connect or any human empathy at play. And then we are told they are doing things with their hands. So again, even the nurses are metonymized, as it were. They're described in a way which breaks them down into different fragments. They're working with their hands, doing things with their hands. One just the same as another. They're completely replicable. They're completely replaceable. One looks exactly like the other person. And it's a big straitjacket machinery at play. So it's impossible to tell how many there are. And now we're told, my body is a pebble to them. They tend it as water tends to the pebbles it must run over, smoothing them gently. They bring me numbness, in the bright needles they bring me sleep. And then we're told, this is very interesting, because what we're told is the body becomes a pebble through which water passes. And of course the pebble has no agency in terms of rejecting the water. You can't reject the water must come to the pebble, and the pebble will just stand stonily and then take the water as it comes to it. 10 sort of pebbles it must run over, smoothing them gently. So the comparison between with the body with something inanimate as a pebble is interesting, because that talks about, or that perhaps underlines, the inanimate quality of the body itself, the stony quality of the body, the heavy quality of the body, which becomes agency-less in quality, agency-less in character. And interestingly, we are told, they bring me numbness in the bright needles and bring me sleep. So the whole idea of numbness, which was anticipated by the anesthetist at the beginning, is interesting, because what numbness does, numbness undercuts consciousness, numbness undercuts conscious control, and numbness undercuts conscious and cognitive control at play. So the whole idea of making you numb in the medical space liquidates your agency, takes away your agency, as it were. And they bring me sleep. So sleep and loss of consciousness, or sleep or numbness, they become completely quantifiable attributes over here. So how much sleep should be given to the patient, how much numbness should be given to the patient, can be measured and metonymized over here through the bright needles and the tablets, presumably, which are given to her through different degrees. So, the whole idea of metonymizing or quantifying something which, things which are abstract in quality, things which are phenomenal in quality. Sleep is a phenomenal quality, something which happens to you in a very organic, experiential way. So the point is, the whole idea of experientiality, the whole experience of experientiality has been commodified, has been dehumanized, has been quantified in the medical space. And what happens to your agency? What happens to your embodiment? How do you negotiate with the world around you in this kind of reified medical space, in this kind of reified medical case? What do you respond as a human subject over here? Or do you completely become a human object, a dehumanized object, which is what is being described over here, a gradual process of dehumanization, a very slow process of dehumanization. And the violence is very slow, the violence is very, very, gradual in quality, but that makes it more menacing as well. And now we're told, now I have lost myself, I'm sick of baggage. My patent leather overnight case like a black pillbox. My husband and child smiling out of the family photo. The smiles catch onto my skin like little smiling hooks. So this is the beginning of the phase where it becomes more and more synesthetic in quality. And by synesthetic, I mean, obviously I'm alluding to synesthesia, which is a very interesting cognitive mixture of different senses. So, in a typically synesthetic condition, tactility and visuality can come together. So you can almost get a feeling that you're touching something that you're seeing at the same time. You're hearing something that you are seeing at the same time. So they'll come together and make you, and give us a synesthetic, supersensory experience. It is obviously a very high phenomenal quality. Now, interestingly, what synesthesia also does is that it defamiliarizes your normal cognitive narrative, as it were, your normal cognitive control. And now, obviously, the person over here, the patient over here, the human subject over here, is an interrupted subject, is somebody who has been interrupted out of a normal functioning machinery. And of course, the whole presence of the dead child becomes important. The miscarriage becomes a very important subtext behind this whole experience. Now, interestingly, she compares herself as baggage. I lost myself, I'm sick of baggage. My patent leather overnight case like a black pillbox. My husband and child smiling out of the family photo. The smiles catch onto my skin. So again, the sight of the photo and the tactility of the smile becomes important. You can almost touch the smiles, and they can sort of come and cling on you like smiling hooks. Hooks obviously become a hunting metaphor, a fishing metaphor with which fish are caught. And now that becomes interesting, because that gives you a sense of being caught, it gives you a sense of being captured through a very tactile experience. Right, so the sight of the smile and the tactility of the smile, they come together in a very interesting and cognitively complex manner. And now we have more metaphors coming in. I have let things slip, a 30-year-old cargo boat stubbornly hanging on to my name and address. So the whole idea of comparing the body with a cargo boat is interesting, and that is very suggestive as well, because what that tells you is that it's not just an ordinary vessel. It's not an adventurous, glamorous vessel of exploration, of adventure, of glory or heroism. It's a vessel which carries a lot of cargo. It's a vessel which carries a lot of luggage. And that idea of carrying lots of luggage becomes important, because that wears you down, or that deadens you, that slows you down. And that sense of deceleration, that sense of decadence, the sense of being slowed down by time and the density of time, as it were, becomes important in this particular image. A 30-year-old cargo boat. So she's comparing her 30-year-old self with a 30-year-old cargo boat. So again, we have a sense of objectification and dehumanization at work. Stubbornly hanging on to my name and address. They have swerved me clear of my loving associations, scared and bare on a green plastic pillowed trolley. I watch my tea set, my barrows of linen, my books sink out of sight, and the water went over my head. I am a nun now, and I have never been so pure. So the whole idea, the whole drowning image keeps coming back in the poem, which gives the speaker sort of an Ophelia-like quality, Ophelia being the girlfriend of Hamlet who killed herself by drowning. And so the whole idea of drowning into numbness, the whole idea of drowning into agency-lessness, the whole idea of drowning into purposelessness becomes very important in the context of this poem. And they have swerved me, so the whole idea of they and me, the binary between they and me becomes important over here. They have swerved me clear of my loving associations, so I've been cut off from my loving associations completely. Scared and bare on a green plastic pillowed trolley. I watch my tea set, my barrows of linen, my books. Again, very mundane metaphors, intimate objects, objects of intimacy, objects of association, tea set, linen, barrows of linen, my books, so things which you are associated with personally. That becomes very important. That personal association, that personal economy of personal associations becomes important over here. But that economy and that narrative of associations sink out of sight, we are told. It drowns completely. That degree, that entire economy of associations dissolves away completely. And that makes her bare, that makes her naked spiritually. And then she compares herself with a nun. The water went over my head. So that the idea of water going over the head, again, there's a very interesting allusion, a very complex allusion to the miscarriage of losing the baby, of being flushed out and being purged out of this experience, and also the trauma of losing the child becomes important. I am a nun now. I have never been so pure. So this very interesting transition from being the mother to the nun becomes interesting, because the whole idea of being nun over here entails, in this particular context, it entails a sense of being emptied out of associations, being emptied out by familial associations of kinship. Any idea of kinship is being done away with completely. And I've never been so pure. So the whole idea of purity becomes important over here. There is a purgatory quality about purity over here, which also entails a sense of violence, perhaps. So you can only come to this purity through violence, through loss, through being a nun, through being completely cleansed of all associations, as it were. So that degree of erasure, that degree of closure, that degree of being cleansed and purged away from all associations becomes quite palpably present in this particular context. So the word nun and the word pure, again, these are generally associated with positivity, with transcendence, with with a sense of rebirth and regeneration, but over here they have more complex associations. Okay, I didn't want any flowers. I only wanted to lie with my hands turned up and utterly empty. How free it is. You have no idea how free. The peacefulness is so big it dazes you, right? So the whole idea of being dazed by peacefulness becomes important, because what we are told is peacefulness becomes almost an object over here. Peacefulness becomes almost a metaphor of possession. So she's possessed by peacefulness in a way which is violent, which is almost visceral in quality. And that viscerality, that violence becomes very, very important over here, especially in the context of the loss of agency, which is being talked about, which has been described. Okay. So the whole idea of not wanting flowers, and despite that getting flowers is important, because what she seems to say, I can't reject, I don't have the option to say no. So the flowers come in and they seem to possess me with the peacefulness, and this peacefulness is violent in quality, as I said. And then the idea of being utterly empty is important as well. That's of course connected to the idea of liquidation, or the liquidated self that is being talked about constantly in this poem. Okay, so the peacefulness is so big it dazes you. It just completely makes you something else. It unsettles you cognitively. It unsettles you existentially and phenomenally. And it asks nothing. A name tag, a few trinkets is what the dead close on. Finally, I imagine them shutting their mouths on it like a communion tablet. And this very Christian metaphor of the communion tablet, the communion bread, which is shared by believers in a table, becomes important over here. And because that idea of communal consumption, the whole idea of coming together and consuming a tablet, also entails a sense of closure over here, because there's a dead which has been talked about, who are being talked about over here, the many dead people, the dead presence in the room, and of course the obvious reference could be to the dead child, the unborn child over here. So the dead close on, and finally I imagine them shutting their mouths on it like a communion tablet. So the dead close on peacefulness like a communion tablet. And that whole idea of peacefulness becoming a fleshed out body which is then consumed by the dead, and then through the act of consumption the dead arrive at a closure, is what has been suggested over here. So we have very, very morbid metaphors at work over here. So what has been appropriated are Christian metaphors, biblical allusions, and then of course it is recontextualized and tied into the human experience over here, the personal experience over here, right? So the sense of closure, the sense of consumption become intimately tied to each other in this particular context. And now we have the reference to the tulips at work. The tulips are too red in the first place. They hurt me. Even through the gift paper, I could hear them breathe lightly through the white swaddlings, like an awful baby. So, the whole idea, the awful baby becomes important. The unborn baby, the dead baby, is a constant presence in the poem. And we talked about, we told that the tulips are too red. So that redness of the tulips becomes important, because it can also be suggested, it can also be suggestive of the redness of our own body, our own loss, of our own trauma, of our own injury, of our own wound, which was caused by during the process of losing the child. So that becomes very interestingly dialogic with the redness of the tulips, which are situated right across the room, and that makes her viscerally uncomfortable. That generates a degree of visceral violence over here. They hurt me, even through the gift paper I could hear them breathe lightly through the white swaddlings like an awful baby. The redness talks to my wound. It corresponds. So again, we're talking about a dialogic quality over here. The redness of the tulips and the redness of our own body, they become very interestingly and perhaps perversely dialogic with each other in a way which makes us very, very unsettled and traumatized. It corresponds. They are subtle. They seem to float, though they weigh me down, upsetting me with the sudden tongues and the color, a dozen red lead sinkers round my neck. So again, the whole idea of drowning becomes important. The drowning image becomes important over here. The tulips just seem to float around her. The tulips seem to weigh her down, and they upset her with the sudden tongues and the color. So again, tactility and visuality coming together in a very synesthetic quality, in a very synesthetic condition. The sudden tongues touching her, as it were, the colors screaming out of the tulips, the redness becoming a trigger for the traumatic memory, as it were, and then the tulips become a dozen red lead sinkers around my neck. So the whole idea of the drowning body becomes important. The tulips come across to her, are perceived by her in a cognitive frame as red lead sinkers, which will drown her gradually. And that image of drowning again gives an Ophelia-like quality to this particular character. Nobody watched me before, now I am watched. The tulips turn to me, and the window behind me, where once a day the light slowly widens and slowly thins, and I see myself flat, ridiculous, a cut paper shadow between the eye of the sun and the eyes of the tulips, and I have no face. I've wanted to efface myself. The vivid tulips eat my oxygen. Again, the whole idea of being watched becomes important. As an example of medical surveillance, as an example of the medical gaze, which we know by now is a very extremely reifying gaze. It reifies a human self. It cuts it down to an object. It cuts it down to a symptom, to a disease, etc., which needs to be corrected. An object, an interrupted, a dysfunctional object, dysfunctional machine, which needs to become functional again. That's the whole point of the gaze, the whole condition, the quality of the gaze at play. The tulips turn to me, and the window behind me, where once a day the light slowly widens and slowly thins. So the window becomes a liminal frame between darkness and light. The window becomes a liminal frame between day and night. So the window becomes almost spatio-temporal in quality. It's a space, the window, and at the same time it's also pointed to time. So the spatio-temporal quality of the window is important for us to understand, and also liminality of the experience of looking at the window. So the window becomes a space, a marker for that space, which also becomes a pointer to time, that changes in time. And the window becomes the only indication to her, the only reflection of change in time, a slowly moving time around her. So there's a degree of density about this time, there's a degree of thickening about this time. Time seems to have thickened, time seems to have become dense over here, slowed down, decelerated, and that corresponds to the deceleration of her experience, of her interrupted experience, of her interrupted body. Between the eye of the sun, and what she sees in that kind of a context is, I see myself flat, ridiculous, a cut paper shadow. So the degree of superficiality becomes important over here, and that is connected to embodiment, and that superficiality is also connected to superfluity. So the flatness is a superficiality, the ridiculousness is a superfluity, and they're connected together in the sense of the loss of embodiment suffered by the speaker over here. I see myself flat, ridiculous, a cut paper shadow. This is an example of de-embodiment. So you lose a sense of self, you become a flat object with no dimension, with no cognitive dimension at play. Between the eye of the sun and the eyes of the tulips, I have no face, and I've wanted to efface myself. The vivid tulips eat my oxygen. So between the eye of the sun and the eye of the tulips, which in a temporal, spatio-temporal setting could be the window and the tulips. The eye of the sun could be the window through which the sun comes in and departs the room, and the eye of the tulip is the other end of the room. And so between these 2 points, she's situated. You can also read it some other way. The eye of the sun and the eye of the tulips could be the macro gaze and the micro gaze, the bigger, wider, all-consuming gaze, and the more intimate, menacing gaze, which is in the room. So, and she's situated between these 2 orders of gaze. The both readings are equally valid. And I have no face, and I've wanted to efface myself. The vivid tulips eat my oxygen. So I have no face, I've become a faceless creature, and I've wanted to efface myself. So there could be an allusion to the possibility of suicide, the intention of killing yourself, but at the same time she wants to do away with herself, her own sense of agency, her own ownership on her own self. So I wanted to efface myself. And also you could turn it around and read it some other way by saying that this idea of effacing yourself could also be a subversive act, that I wanted to do away with all the faces given to me by society as a woman. So I want to do away with all that faces, and I want to efface myself in that way. So the act of effacing and that reading becomes a subversive act, becomes an agentic act. So both readings are equally valid at play over here. The vivid tulips eat my oxygen. So again, the whole idea of tulips eating her oxygen becomes important. So that becomes an act of consumption. The tulips have almost a carnivorous, cannibalistic quality over here, and they eat away her lifeblood. They eat away what's really vital for her system. And the loss of vitality, the loss of what's vital for her, is a further example of liquidation that the poem constantly dramatizes. So we'll stop at this point today, and we'll continue with this text in the next lecture. Thank you for your attention.